Video games are such a subtly convoluted art form. On the surface, all they appear to do is have the player go from point A to point B. But once you step back and pry open the hood, you'll notice all of the nuanced details that makes them not suck after 5 seconds. For a game to be captivating, it not only needs to challenge the player, but must also reward them for their efforts. However, that payoff shouldn't come at the cost of bastardization. Like, a game should never be like, "Oh, great job on finally beating the level after 25 attempts. Here's your participation award, fucko." This idea of instant gratification for the most menial of tasks jeopardizes the player's dignity, and in turn makes the game feel pandering and unsatisfying to play. So in a world where games do nothing but treat you like a brain-dead child, how could this problem ever be fixed? Well, it's simple. You just scatter a bunch of shit through a level and have the player collect it for a sense of hopelessness. Collectibles are such a criminally underappreciated aspect of video games. What appears to be nothing more than meaningless objects to fill up space in a level can actually be some of the greatest tools for teaching you how to play the game. This isn't saying there's a deep philosophical meaning behind these things that banks off the player's low attention span, but what I am saying is that there's a special art of subtlety behind their existence. And I know what you're thinking, what could possibly be so subtle about huge golden coins or rings that spin around like stupid-ass Beyblades? Well, to put it in simpler terms, it's not in the way they appear, but in the way they're used that makes them so effective. When discussing something as seemingly mundane as collectibles, the best place to start would be through practicality. Their main priority is to teach the player how the game works, whether that be through demonstrating a mechanic, hinting at a possible secret, or by letting the player know you gotta go this way to win. They help establish the basics without being too obvious about it. To use an example, let's take a look at Mario World for a second. By the time you get through the first world, you think, alright, I got a pretty good hang of this game so far. But then by the time you reach Donut Plain, you're thrown a fucking gargantuan left turn with the introduction of the Cape Feather. The greatest power-up of all time, I just have to add. The only problem is that it makes no sense at all, until finally you try jumping and next thing you know, it's to the top of the skybox for you. Here is quite literally where your fight-or-flight instincts come in, because you have the choice of either skipping the entire level or careening to the ground like a World War I biplane. And as you're having this epiphany, you see this out of the corner of your eye. Quite possibly the most majestic thing to grace the earth. Turns out by following the trail of coins, you'll grow accustomed to the flight mechanics until soon enough, it won't take any effort to pull off at all. This method of visualization is undoubtedly the best way a game can teach the player, as it not only utilizes collectibles to hint at your possibilities, but it doesn't disrupt the flow either. When a game has to painstakingly explain every small detail about its mechanics, you begin to realize how little dignity it actually has. This problem has been discussed to nauseam nowadays, as it's one of the worst things to ever plague the industry. And while this issue is more avoidable for some games than others, it's a nearly undeniable fact that collectibles played a major role in preventing this. And that's without even discussing their effects on immersion. When learning from collectibles, they teach from the level's landscape and are used strategically to make them appear as part of the world themselves. Meanwhile, when learning from a built-in tutorial, nothing takes you out of the game faster than having a character say something like, "Oh, fucking press A to jump." Granted, one could argue that collectibles can break immersion based off of their appearance, but they're able to establish themselves as a part of the world because of how frequently they appear. So when a game that's about a hedgehog collecting golden rings is more immersive than any game ever that tells you how to walk forward, that's when you know collectibles do their job. With that said, however, this entire time I've been focusing on how they affect 2D games. And now with this segment running on life support, as I lack anything else to discuss, let's move on to the next by doing what all franchises did back in the mid-90s, make an incredibly awkward transition into 3D. As games began their journey into the third dimension, this led to their grand scale rising to levels never thought imaginable. And with this came groundbreaking new mechanics, stronger feelings of immersion, and most importantly, huge ass worlds to fuck around in. The only problem is, while these newfangled open worlds were fun to explore, after a while they became agonizingly boring. So what do you think the resolution was, everyone? Say it with me. Put a bunch of random shit everywhere. There's a strong quality of life control that collectibles bring to 3D games. While their presence is used to subtly enhance the player's experience in a 2D environment, it is here where their existence is vital to the game actually being fun. Take for instance games like Mario 64, Spyro, and Sonic Adventure, all three of which are non-linear 3D platformers. And even though they each have objectives to complete in their worlds, there are incentives for the player to go off of the main path and explore what's around them. It prevents the level from feeling barren and lifeless, and instead allows for an extra layer of depth that gives them a factor of replayability. Cause now it's not just, oh wow, I beat the level, no need to go back to it ever again. It's instead more like, oh wow, I beat the level, I wonder if there's a secret behind that rock. But this is all without acknowledging the massive elephant in the room. Collectathons. These are the perfect exemplifications for what collectibles can do for a game. Instead of making them just a small optional part of a level, they're instead a necessity to the entirety of the game itself. Now, the idea of basing a game around collecting stuff sounds like the most redundant thing ever, but when done correctly, that sad truth can never be realized. For example, let's look at a game like Banjo-Kazooie. I know it's an easy pick and everybody's gonna call me a simp, but I swear to God it's a good example. The game has a plethora of large worlds that the player spends almost the entire time traveling through, and while none of them are too gargantuan in size, what makes them worth exploring are the collectibles scattered throughout. Cause truth be told, if it weren't for their presence, these worlds would have as much life as a fucking soulless open world game. They're used as a form of progression, but with the way it's designed, it feels natural and keeps the pace consistent, so it never feels like you have to go out of your way to progress, as obtaining these collectibles is made incredibly convenient. All of this in mind, there is still one very minuscule reason that makes them so important to a game. They need a reason to be collected. See, the reason why collectibles work to the extent they do is because there's a payoff for going out of your way to obtain them. And that reward can come in a variety of things, like an extra life, a bonus stage. It may not seem like much, but to the player, it determines them to continue, as this reward can help them in the long run. So what do you suppose happens when a game gets rid of that payoff? Well, bad things, obviously. As video games have continued to evolve, some have done a better job at carrying over their original conventions than others. For instance, Mario still collects coins, but now they're used as a currency to buy silly-ass costumes. While they don't retain that original incentive, they've developed a new one that helps them maintain that importance. But you know who hasn't made that transition as gracefully? Honestly, who'd you expect? It's Sonic. Now, I know everyone loves to make fun of Sonic, and it's gotten to a point where his skin is probably thicker than cement. But I'm justified in my actions, cause this revolves around the common decency of game design. Now, Sonic has had a rather good track record with giving collectibles a purpose, especially in the earlier days when they were used to find Chaos Emeralds. However, this streak would eventually be broken thanks to Sonic Lost World back in 2013. And with all the questionable design choices that came along with that game, some stupid-ass moron decided to no longer give an extra life for collecting 100 rings. This inherently destroyed half of the game, as this was not only a staple in the franchise for over 20 years at that point. When there are levels like this scattered throughout, it just makes you ask, what is the point to this? Thankfully, Sega realized the person responsible for this was clinically insane, and added a patch that resolved this issue. But for that allotted time, Lost World was an even more unfinished, boring game. But if I'm gonna talk shit about these games, then I'm gonna talk shit about the biggest offender to collectible misuse. Donkey Kong 64. This is honestly one of the saddest games ever, because while it brims with so much potential, it is completely weighed down by its main mechanic of having 5 different playable characters. Because of this, every character has a trillion different things to collect, and admittedly, it wouldn't be as much of a problem if the game allowed you to switch characters at any given point. Instead, anytime you want to change, you gotta mosey your way on over to the tag barrel and switch to the monkey that packs different heat. And since the game prevents you from collecting anything that doesn't correlate with the character you're using, this leads to countless amounts of backtracking and roadblocking. Two factors that will almost always make a game terrible, as they artificially pad the experience out just to make it last longer. So as long as a game with collectibles aren't like these games, then it's fine. Their natural simplicity is what makes them as effective as they are, and thanks to their mendability, they've been able to evolve throughout the years alongside their games. Now that mechanics such as extra lives or high scores have slowly lost their relevance, collectibles have been able to manifest their purpose into something that better suits games of today. Whether that be acting as currency like in Mario Odyssey, or a means of upgrading yourself like in Sonic Generations, devs understand how to maintain their practicality. It honestly all boils down to how effectively they're implemented and how their inclusion is able to enhance the overall experience. Collectibles give a game purpose in one way or another, and although it's a horribly thankless job, they're preventing games everywhere from sucking complete ass.